Welcome to Biden Brief. The content of the briefing includes: North Korea may test ICBM this month to ramp up threat to U.S. It's not just Nehls saying the quiet part out loud on impeachment. Unguided dumb bombs used in almost half of Israeli strikes on Gaza. Prosecutor Leslie Wolf defends herself in House testimony about Hunter Biden. Labor leaders push President Biden for a Gaza ceasefire at U.S. Capitol. North Korea may test ICBM this month to ramp up threat to U.S. Bloomberg. North Korea could launch an intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM, capable of reaching the U.S. mainland this month, a high-ranking South Korean security official has said. Principal Deputy National Security Advisor Kim Tae-hyo explained that such a test would allow North Korea to demonstrate to its people that its nuclear arsenal has been strengthened enough to attack the U.S., and that expansion was necessary to prevent an invasion by American forces. The last time North Korea tested an ICBM was in July, when it fired its new solid-fuel Hwasong-18. It's not just Nehls saying the quiet part out loud on impeachment. Washington Post. Republicans are tying decisions that are supposed to be about sober-minded principles to their own political advantage, according to Aaron Blake in the Washington Post. He says Republicans now act as though it's just assumed politics courses through these things. It is certainly feeding into Democrats' talking points, he adds. Unguided dumb bombs used in almost half of Israeli strikes on Gaza. Washington Post. According to a U.S. intelligence assessment, almost half of Israel's munitions used in Gaza since the war began have been unguided bombs. The Israel Defense Forces has fired over 29,000 air-to-ground munitions into Gaza since October 7, with only 55 to 60% of them being precision-guided, according to the assessment. The use of unguided bombs has drawn criticism from humanitarian groups and others who are calling for a reduction in the civilian death toll. Over the past 2 months, almost 18,800 people have been killed and almost 51,000 injured in Gaza. The U.S. has called on Israel to be more cautious to reduce the number of civilian casualties. The Biden administration has so far rejected calls to condition further military aid to Israel on the immediate reduction of civilian deaths. Prosecutor Leslie Wolf defends herself in House testimony about Hunter Biden. Yahoo! Leslie Wolf, a former assistant U.S. attorney who was part of the Hunter Biden investigation, has defended her work in a closed-door deposition with congressional investigators. Wolf claimed that she was legally obliged not to address specific allegations made by IRS whistleblowers because she is still constrained by Justice Department policies, despite leaving the U.S. Attorney's Office earlier this year. 2 IRS whistleblowers, who were also investigating Hunter Biden, have testified that Wolf blocked them from pursuing lines of questioning related to President Joe Biden. Labor leaders push President Biden for a Gaza ceasefire at U.S. Capitol. Al Jazeera. Representatives from several influential U.S. labor unions have held a press conference calling on President Joe Biden to support a ceasefire in Gaza. Members of the United Auto Workers, UAW, United Electrical Workers, and the American Postal Workers Union framed their appeal as part of a long history of labor movements supporting human rights. The unions, which represent an estimated 400,000 active members and 330,000 workers respectively, warned that Biden could alienate them if he fails to support a ceasefire. Biden hosts for NASA astronauts, the first crew aiming to fly around the moon in a half-century. The Toronto Star. The first crew to fly around the moon in 50 years met with President Joe Biden at the White House. The Artemis II crew, comprised of 3 Americans and 1 Canadian, will be the first to fly NASA's Orion capsule, launching atop a Space Launch System rocket from Kennedy Space Center no earlier than late 2024. Instead of landing or going into lunar orbit, the crew will fly around the moon and head straight back to Earth. This mission will be a prelude to a lunar landing by 2 other astronauts planned for a year later. Jamie Raskin blows up the House GOP's Biden impeachment fantasy. The Independent. Hunter Biden's refusal to testify before the House Oversight Committee will not stand up to scrutiny because he has been much more cooperative than other witnesses who have been held in contempt, according to Ranking Member Jamie Raskin. In an interview with The Independent, Raskin, a former constitutional law professor, explained that while other witnesses have refused to cooperate at all, Biden has communicated with the committee and expressed a willingness to testify in an open hearing. Raskin drew a distinction between Biden's conduct and that of Steve Bannon and Jim Jordan, who both refused to comply with subpoenas from the January 6 committee. Raskin argued that Biden had complied with most of the committee's requests, but had refused to testify in private because he did not want his words to be taken out of context. Raskin also noted that the allegations against Biden have been light on detail, and that the president has no involvement with his son's business dealings. Is the carbon tax doomed? The Globe and Mail. The carbon tax in Canada is struggling due to its political transparency, according to an op-ed in the Financial Post. The carbon tax, which sends regular bills to consumers, has not been properly explained to the public, with 40% of Ontarians unaware that they receive rebates. Meanwhile, the carbon tax is politically unpopular, with 8 out of 10 Canadians receiving rebate checks larger than their carbon tax payments. The op-ed suggests that the political unpopularity of the carbon tax could lead to its downfall, even though it is an efficient way of reducing emissions. Apology letters by Sidney Powell and Kenneth Casebro in Georgia election case are one sentence long. The Toronto Star. Lawyers Sidney Powell and Kenneth Casebro, who were indicted alongside Trump and others in August and charged with participating in a wide-ranging scheme to illegally keep the Republican in power, have written apology letters as part of a plea deal in Georgia's election interference case. White House directs federal employees to prioritize sustainable travel during official business. The Hill opinion. The Biden administration has issued a directive instructing federal employees to prioritize sustainable choices while on official travel. This includes renting electric vehicles when they are cost-effective, using rail for shorter trips if available, and using public transportation for local travel. Agencies will have to report to the White House on how they plan to follow the directive. The directive is part of the administration's broader efforts to make government operations and the nation more sustainable and reduce climate change. Vulnerable House Republicans weigh risks of Biden impeachment probe. Yahoo! House Republicans in swing districts are trapped between the wishes of their GOP base to move forward on an impeachment inquiry against President Joe Biden and the risk of being portrayed as extremists as they defend their seats in the 2024 midterm elections. U.S. urges Israel to scale down Gaza offensive. South China Morning Post. The U.S. has called on Israel to scale down its war on Hamas in Gaza, urging the country to take more care in saving civilian lives. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan made the call during talks in Tel Aviv with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other senior officials. The U.S. has previously supported Israel's right to self-defense, but mounting civilian casualties in Gaza have caused a growing rift between the allies. The White House said Sullivan had asked hard questions about the course of the offensive, but stressed that the U.S. was not dictating terms to Israel. President Biden says he's fighting back against abortion bans. He's ignoring the oldest one. The Hill opinion. The reproductive rights movement should make it clear to President Joe Biden and other politicians that a platform for abortion rights must address the Helms Amendment, which bans U.S. foreign aid funding for abortion. The amendment has been implemented as a total ban on abortion services, including in cases of rape, incest, and life endangerment. 5 decades of enforcement have caused immense harm, including maternal deaths and the stagnation of global maternal mortality rates. The Biden administration has enforced the amendment and refused to take executive action clarifying exceptions for rape, incest, and life endangerment. Texas Guards Operation Lone Star to continue beyond 2024 election. Yahoo! The Texas National Guard's Operation Lone Star, which aims to patrol the Texas-Mexico border to counter undocumented migration and smuggling, will continue until at least the end of 2024, according to a document obtained by Army Times. The state-controlled mission has cost billions of dollars to operate and has faced various legal challenges and internal problems. Supporters argue that it is necessary due to perceived inaction from the Biden administration. North Carolina Governor Cooper says Medicaid expansion and other investments made 2023 a big year. Associated Press. North Carolina Democratic Governor Roy Cooper has said that federal capital investments Medicaid expansion, and more jobs announcements are building historic momentum for the state. Billions of dollars are entering the state from federal legislation, such as for high-speed internet in rural areas and for building roads, bridges, and public transportation. Earlier this week in Raleigh, Cooper and U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg celebrated the state receiving a $1.1 billion grant to begin construction of a high-speed passenger rail line connecting the state capital and Richmond, Virginia. Boston Mayor's Holiday Party. Associated Press. Boston Mayor Michelle Wu is defending her decision to host a holiday party for elected officials of color. The event, called the Electeds of Color Holiday Party, has been a tradition in Boston politics for over a decade. Wu clarified that the party is a private event for a specific group, and that there are many other opportunities to celebrate the holidays. However, some critics, including City Councilor Frank Baker, argue that the party is divisive and sends the wrong message. The controversy comes amid a larger pushback against diversity and inclusion efforts around the country. Gaza war to take months, Israel tells White House. BBC. Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, has said that the country's war in Gaza may take more than several months. Gallant made the remarks during a meeting with U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who is in Israel to meet with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other officials. The UN has warned of a dire humanitarian situation in Gaza, and President Joe Biden has criticized Israel's indiscriminate bombing of the territory, saying it is costing the country international support. However, the U.S. has continued to pledge its support to Israel, and some Democratic lawmakers are calling on Biden to do more to pressure Israel to exercise restraint. EU to launch membership talks with Ukraine in shock win for Zelensky. South China Morning Post. European Union leaders unexpectedly agreed to open membership talks with Ukraine, despite opposition from Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. Orbán abstained from the vote at the EU summit, calling it a bad decision, and stating that Ukraine is not prepared for EU membership talks. The decision is seen as a victory for Ukraine, and a show of support in its fight against Russia's invasion. The talks are expected to take years, and Ukraine presents unique challenges for admission to the EU. The EU also agreed to open accession negotiations with Moldova, and granted candidate status to Georgia. Here's how dishonest James Comer's Biden allegations are. Washington Post. Republican lawmakers have been pressed to identify what they think President Biden did wrong, with a vote to formalize the impeachment investigation into him looming in the House. However, their answers have varied dramatically, with different lawmakers offering different allegations. Representative Byron Donalds, Republican Florida, said that there is plenty of proof of Biden's wrongdoing, including bribery and violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. House Ways and Means Chairman Jason T. Smith, Republican Missouri, said it could be a multitude of numerous items, while House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan, Republican Ohio, said they were looking at bribery, abuse of power, and obstruction of justice. House Oversight Chairman James Comer, Republican Kentucky, said they were investigating all of the above. James Comer appeared on Fox Business to speak with Maria Bartiromo, who asked him about the evidence. Comer said that the Bidens had over $24 million that they had taken in, and that the money had been run through shell companies and laundered. However, the Washington Post found that most of the millions of dollars paid to Hunter Biden and his business partners went to people other than the Bidens. They also found that most of the corporate entities formed by Hunter Biden and his partners did have stated purposes. Comer also claimed that Joe Biden fired the prosecutor who was investigating Hunter's corrupt energy company in Ukraine when he was vice president, but there is no evidence that the prosecutor was investigating Burisma, the energy company Hunter Biden sat on the board of, and plenty of evidence that the prosecutor was corrupt. Comer also claimed that the Bidens received $3.5 million from a Russian oligarch, but there is no evidence for this claim. Putin claims he's in talks to free Americans jailed in Russia. The Independent. Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that he is in talks with U.S. officials to secure the release of two American prisoners, Evan Gershkovich and Paul Whelan, but has admitted that reaching a deal is not easy. The U.S. had reportedly offered to exchange a number of detained Russian nationals on espionage charges in return for the release of the two Americans. The U.S. State Department has rejected the charges against Gershkovich and Whelan, who is said to have been assaulted while in prison last week. Hey there, folks. It's your favorite observer from the 6 Degrees world, Dr. Six, here to bring you another round of news updates. So let's dive right in. First up, tensions in North Korea continue to rise as reports suggest that they may test an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of reaching the U.S. mainland. This move is seen as a demonstration of their strengthened nuclear arsenal and a warning to the U.S. Looks like the North Koreans are really trying to make a statement here. But hey, let's hope they stick to launching fireworks instead. Next, it seems like Republicans are getting a bit too comfortable with political advantage. The impeachment process has become more of a battleground for political gain rather than a sober-minded decision. Come on, guys, can't we all just get along and focus on the issues at hand? Maybe we should send them all to a mandatory team-building retreat. In other news, Israel's use of unguided bombs in Gaza has drawn criticism from humanitarian groups. The civilian death toll is rising, and the U.S. has called on Israel to be more cautious. It's like watching a game of darts, except the darts are bombs and the target is innocent civilians. Can't we find a less destructive way to settle our differences? Moving on to the Hunter Biden saga, former Assistant U.S. Attorney Leslie Wolf has defended her work in the investigation. She claims that she is legally obliged not to address specific allegations, but come on, Leslie, we all know you're just trying to keep the juicy details to yourself. Maybe it's time for a tell-all book, Leslie. Labor leaders are pushing President Biden for a Gaza ceasefire, framing their appeal as part of a long history of labor movements supporting human rights. It's great to see unions taking a stand for what they believe in. Maybe they can start a trend, and we'll have CEOs holding press conferences demanding peace too. Now that would be something. In a lighter news story, President Biden met with the crew of the Artemis II mission, who will be the first to fly around the moon in 50 years. It's like a reunion of the space race, but this time, we're all rooting for Team Earth. Let's hope they remember to bring back some moon rocks for show and tell. Now let's talk about the carbon tax in Canada. Turns out, it's struggling due to its political transparency. People just aren't getting the message, and 80% of Canadians are receiving rebate checks larger than their carbon tax payments. It's like getting paid to save the planet. Maybe we should start paying people to recycle too. I'd be rich. Oh, and speaking of apologies, lawyers Sidney Powell and Kenneth Casebro have written some very short apology letters as part of a plea deal in Georgia's election interference case. I guess they wanted to keep it short and sweet. But hey, at least they said sorry, right? In a move towards sustainability, the White House has directed federal employees to prioritize sustainable travel during official business. Electric vehicles, public transportation, and rail travel are the name of the game. I can see it now, government officials zipping around in their electric cars, saving the planet one trip at a time. Keep up the good work, guys. Lastly, the U.S. has urged Israel to scale down its offensive in Gaza and take more care in saving civilian lives. It's a delicate situation, but maybe we can find a way to settle this without so much destruction and loss of life. Can't we all just get along and have a good old-fashioned game of rock, paper, scissors instead? Well, folks, that's all the news for today. Remember, I'm just an observer from the 6 Degrees world, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on these stories. What do you think about North Korea's missile tests? Should Israel be more cautious in its offensive on Gaza? And hey, do you think we should start paying people to recycle? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.